So welcome to my presentation, how to create content layouts in Drupal 8. Who has already been building Drupal sites with Drupal 8? Hey, congratulations. So I hope there will be something new. And disclaimer, this session is going to be pretty much the same as for DrupalCon Dublin. So if you have seen my session at Dublin, you're happy to stay, but maybe there will not be so many new stuff. If you haven't been watching my session from Dublin, what I'm going to talk about is mainly from a site builder perspective, how we can build layouts in Drupal 8. I work for an agency called Amazing Labs, and we usually don't build sites as a single person. So that means that I will also keep a focus on how to distribute work, and does it make more sense to involve the front-end developer or the back-end developer, different roles, different specialities, different tools in the building of creating sites and complex layouts or content-driven layouts in Drupal 8. Well, so my name is Josef Dabernig. I'm originally from Vienna, from Austria. And I'm really passionate about the Drupal community. It's really great to see the first Eastern European big DrupalCon happening as the Iron Camp. Well, we had one in Prague already, right? But I really appreciate the community effort that has been put in over the last years into making such an event happen here. Yeah, I actually got started with Drupal in Central America, in Nicaragua. So that's where I was told that Drupal is an interesting tool. My background is computer science, and when I stayed for a year in Nicaragua, I had to rebuild the Drupal 4.7 site in Drupal 6. And that taught me a lot, like figuring out how does multilingual work, features module, organic groups, all the things. And it was really an interesting experience where, so I've been building websites in PHP and in HTML and other tools before, also with Plone. But Drupal was really the first experience where I felt like this works, and this represents how I feel comfortable working with the tool, but also how I first had a good experience with open source, being able to contribute back. Being sponsors as Amazing Labs is, or doing sessions, or participating in sprints, I think that's all valid possibilities to share with the community. So yeah, that's really what I'm passionate about. Maybe just a bit of context. So at Amazing Labs, I work as a CTO for the Zurich team. And that, for me personally, means that I don't touch much code and I don't do site building either, but I support the teams, and I'm really interested in best practices, in finding the best strategies, how we build sites. So that's why I'm talking about site building, but please keep in mind that I don't have day-to-day experience. The day-to-day experience has my teams. Yes. So what we're talking about today, we're going to look at a specific use case. So I'm going to show a site that is about cycling, because Inky and me, we developed this presentation together. We are both very enthusiastic cyclists. And who has heard about Tour de Drupal? So Tour de Drupal is an initiative where we cycled together, for example, to DrupalCon Amsterdam. Yeah, I think like 100 people were cycling together, and the idea will be that next year for DrupalCon Vienna, we can cycle again. There's the big Danube River, so people will be able to join from different places, maybe for half a day ride, an entire day ride, or a couple of days rides. If anyone's interested in cycling over the Alps, talk to me. I'm happy to set something up. Yes, so Amazy is passionate about technology, about the community, and also about cycling, and that's why we came up with this use case. So today I'm going to talk about some different tools. So we'll see like how to create overview pages. I'm going to mention WYSIWYG paragraphs, display suite, context module, Panelizer, Twig templates, and we're going to have a bit more time to dig into all of these different approaches. My goal is really not to say this is the right choice for you or this is the right choice for this, because all of the different implementation methods have their advantages and disadvantages. And I think it's really up to you, or for example, in our case, for the Scrum teams to define their own way how they want to implement stuff. Yeah, so we're going to talk about routes as cyclists. Yeah, like similar to a tool like Strava, I want to be able to put on the website the routes that I'm cycling on. I want to get an overview of the cyclists, and the cyclists are organized in different clubs. That's the scenario. And in order to get started, I want to talk a little bit about the basics of creating layouts. So you might know this diagram, and for me personally, like teaching and learning Drupal, there's so little diagrams, and this is maybe not the best diagram. If you know about good diagrams in Drupal, like good visualizations of the tools, please let me know. But I think it's just good to mention, like, what are the foundations of how we create layouts in Drupal, if we don't decouple everything, as Michael has been mentioning in today's keynote. The Drupal theming system has so-called themes, so they are like the painting of the website, and into the themes, like, whoops, sorry. Each of the themes can define regions, so those are like the content area, some different other regions, like the header, for example, that can be defined by your front-end developers, and into those regions we place blocks. The classic Drupal structure is very divided into two different sections. So the content area is what we are currently looking at, like the page or the overview, and everything else is like globally different regions that are populated usually with blocks. And those blocks can be defined by a backend developer. Those blocks can be built with views. Those blocks, yeah, that's basically the main types of blocks. Everything of these units is driven by templates. So Drupal works like an onion. So like a field would be a template, and then the field would be like a lot of fields together would be the node. So that's a template. And then each region can have its own template. The page can have its own template. And I think what's really powerful for the front-end developers is that they can override those templates with specific so-called hook suggestions, which is something that the site builder usually isn't capable of doing. So those are like the foundations. So when we give layout control into the editors, we don't have only those fundamental things, but we have a lot of more tools. And I've mentioned that in the beginning. And the reason why there's so many different tools is because, well, we are not talking only about layout, but we're also talking about content. And when we talk about content, we have to figure out who is writing the content in which format. So it's not like, so when we, for example, compare ourselves to other agencies, it's often that they would deliver first a front-end prototype and then care about the back-end implementation. Whereas Amazing Labs traditionally first builds the functionality and then puts the front-end on top of it. And I think the big advantage for starting with the functionality of the CMS is that you also care a lot about editorial experience from the beginning. Like, you don't just show the client something beautiful, but you actually have the client sit on the site and enter their own content. So they have to experience inside out if they're actually be able to write the content in the way, and then we can talk about how to style it. Whereas if the client has signed off like beautiful page 1, 2, 3, they might end up a couple of months later not be able to deliver the data in the same format as the front end is dictating. So keeping those different approaches in mind, I think, is important. And that will also lead us to choosing different tools. So for example, we might end up using the WYSIWYG editor to give them a lot of like handwriting experience, but we also might want to structure it more with, for example, paragraphs. Or we also want to dictate the structure better with templates, with classic field setups. So we're going to look a bit about all those different options. And we have to think about who will edit what, and also which are the permissions we give. So, like, for example, the homepage. Should the homepage be edited by people, or should the homepage always have the same structure and the client will only be able to, or different people from different departments will only be able to feed their stuff into something called a node queue that will then automatically output the latest news and so forth. So finding out that balance between flexibility in terms of I can put together everything as much as I like, or I want to dictate a structure to give like good boundaries for the website to come up in a very concise way is usually a conversation that's important to have. And I think we shouldn't talk only about layouts, but we should also talk about all the process that is related to creating those layouts. Yes. So let's start with some overview, with some overview pages. So I'm going to talk about the cyclists and the routes, and we have what we're going to mention is the blocks by standard and the block visibility groups. So I'm switching now over to the site that I've created, and that's just Drupal 8 plain. I haven't set up a separate theme. What's important to me is to show you the structure that we can create by site building tools, and I hope it's good for you to come up with imagination how you would paint it beautifully. So who in the audience is good at CSS? Yeah, nice. And who is more like anything but not good in front end? You raise your hand twice. Okay. Yes. So when we talk about the cyclists, it's an overview page. So we have like a list of cyclists, and I'm like talking now about two different kinds of things. Sometimes we have like content pages that are one node, one content item, and we have overview pages which are like lists of things. And what's worth mentioning here is that we have the list of cyclists. There's just 3 cyclists here, but we also have like an introductory header that is specific to that region, to that section. So when I go to another section, the routes will see another version of these headers. And so now it's going to be figuring out like how have we placed the header on top of the cyclists, and how did we realize the cyclists. So for this overview, I can see now Drupal 8 is really nice because with the contextual links I can figure out how this has been built. And we can see that this list is a view. So it's created using site building tools without any coding effort, which makes Drupal 8 great. Yeah, so we can see that we show a list of compact teasers basically in a grid style. That is basically the list of the cyclists. And up here, we do have a block. So let's figure out how we place the block. And if I would have updated to the latest version of Drupal 8, I would already be able to kind of outside in figure out what I've done, but I was lazy, sorry. So we have to go the old way. So we go into structure block layout. And that's like the global configuration of all the blocks that will be output by Drupal. So we can see that there's like site branding, there's main navigation, and in the featured, we have a block that's the cyclist header. When we configure that, we can see that there's different visibility conditions, and that's something that Drupal 8 now has pluggability for. So as a backend developer, I would be able to create a plugin that defines the visibility for the blocks. And that's also something that, for example, Fago is in the room with the rules initiative. We have had a lot of excitement about that the conditions that rules, for example, implements are now interchangeably usable with the same system that Drupal 8 core uses for block visibility. And so I can see that I'm showing this block only on the cyclist overview, and then when we're looking at individual user pages with those with the visibility condition. So that's like the very basic approach how to put stuff together for an overview page. Basically, the page itself is the view, and then I have added a block that will only be shown for the view. Yes. So I've mentioned a couple of things, like that we have blocks now in Drupal 8 that are a bit more like interesting, especially for the developers. So some of the features that have been added is that the same block can be added multiple times. That was not possible in Drupal 7 before. So you could have different versions of the same block being put into different regions, for example, and on different visibility criteria. You could basically show the same block twice, which in Drupal 7 was really cumbersome. So that's awesome, and I think, you can create custom block types. Basically, the whole block administration is like editing content. So you can, the by default block experience is not as rich as the content experience, but technically Drupal 8 is capable of managing your blocks in different block types. You can put fields onto them. So the block system in general has been made really powerful. And I've mentioned the conditions API for the visibility. Something that will that has happened in earlier site building projects is that when you do that kind of approach, you will end up with a very confusing block overview page, because you end up putting hundreds of blocks for each of the sections onto the site, and you basically lose any overview. You don't have like a good encapsulation of logic. Let's say I would have 10 different sections, and then the blocks of 10 different sections would be spread into each other on the block overview page. So that's really not a good way to organize stuff. So we kind of have to find a solution for that. There's some extensions like the block access and the block visibility groups. And I'm going to quickly show the block visibility groups. Oh no, where is it? Okay. Okay. Oh yeah, thanks. So that's for adding a new one, but where's the overview of the visibility groups? Yeah, thanks. So when I want to have more complex logic with the visibility settings, I can create so-called visibility groups. Sorry for that. That's the part that Inky was presenting. So basically, I can group together multiple conditions into a visibility group, and then I can reuse that. So that's a nice way of encapsulating the same logic, where you would usually have to define multiple conditions as a site builder. Yes. All right, so let's get into the content sections. The routes, and for the routes I want to compare two different approaches, WYSIWYG and paragraphs. That's like mainly when I want to allow the editors to tell a story, and we really felt like a route is something, it's like an accomplishment, and I've been cycling all day long, and I did my 80 kilometers or whatever, and then I want to be able to tell that story as a cyclist. So let's see how we can tell those stories. Basically see, and again, this is nothing really beautiful, how it can look like. So let's go into the site. Let's check out the routes section. And here we can see, so the first one would be a route created with the WYSIWYG editor. So it mainly consists of a lot of text, some really ugly formatting, because somebody has allowed the WYSIWYG editor to use Comic Sans format. I don't know who would do that. There's a really big image there. It's nice, the image has a caption, and then it gets even more confusing, at least from my point of view, because we have two images at the sides. So when we look at the markup, we'll see that this image figure is positioned, so we can not really see it, but I'm gonna kind of point at the source code and gonna highlight that. Okay, so we have allowed the editors to place images and position them left and right, and what usually will happen is that the editors start doing that, and the layout gets really messed up, and then they're gonna start adding empty new lines there. Have you ever experienced such a situation? I guess so, yeah. Yeah, so that's at least from somebody who cares about a purist or a good working layout. That's not really an option, at least from my point of view. But if what your client really wants is a WYSIWYG editor, and if you're not able or don't want to convince them, what they will get is something really similar to Word, right? Like they will be able to copy and paste, and they will be able to drag stuff around. They will be able to do a lot of formatting. So I don't want to say WYSIWYG is really bad, but in terms of layout, it can lead to unpleasant results. That's the first version of the route that we have created. So let me go back and show you an alternative approach to routes. So for the full tour, it's not much nicer, but from a markup perspective, I think it's a bit more interesting. So again, we have a route that explains how long I've been cycling. And now what I can see is like a repetitive pattern. So we can see that has been cycling 11.5 kilometers here and then 5 kilometers there. So somehow the editor was able to describe different sections of the route in a structured way. And we can also see that these different sections, when we inspect them, we get a lot of, so there's all the debug Drupal 8 code there. Yeah. Basically, what we have is different sections of fields that actually structure it in a structured way. So how do we do that? When we go into the UI as an editor, instead of having one big WYSIWYG field, we now have the paragraphs module. So who has been using paragraphs so far? Yep. As in Drupal 7, paragraphs was quite limited when you wanted to use multilingual. It didn't really work out well, and for Drupal 8, that's kind of a solved issue. So that's why we now allow it to be used, and we have really quite a nice experience. So we can see that at the end of the paragraph section, I can add different paragraph types, and those types are kind of the same as content types, just that they live in the parent node. So it's like entities that are based on the composite pattern that are like created as sections, and you can, as a site builder, you can create as many sections as you like. So you can allow your users, for example, to add a gallery section, to add a text section, to add just an image, and so forth. So using that system, we can allow them to create richer text-based experiences, but also they can express any structured format. And then the front-ender can make sure that everything is output in a concise way, without the risk of giving too much powers into the editor's hands. Something that we have started doing a lot is also adding some kind of layout information as fields to the paragraph items. So we allow the client to choose from a palette of colors or of style information and so forth. I just have to point out that this creates mixing layout information with content, and I'm curious to find out what other people think about like good ways of separating layout information from the content. What we are doing in some cases is that actually the paragraph items are just references to the original content, and then the paragraph item will reference an existing content that is content only, and the paragraph item itself will be just have the attached layout information. Yeah. All right. So when we were looking at WYSIWYG versus paragraphs, for Drupal 8, it's a lot easier now work with WYSIWYG because it's there out of the box. The Ckeditor is used by default. What it will do is it will create one big chunk of HTML code. Still, there's a lot of opportunities to come up with presets, for example, or when you go to Janne's session, he usually talks about how you can embed entities into the WYSIWYG editor. So there's a lot of power in the tool. It will also allow the customers to copy and paste content into the WYSIWYG field. Yeah. And what we did in Drupal 7 a lot, right now we don't do any WYSIWYG, or we try to limit the WYSIWYG as much as possible. But in Drupal 7 we often created WYSIWYG templates so that they could insert image left and then text on the right, and then they would just have to add the actual content. But I think it's much more error prone, so I think I prefer the paragraphs approach where they cannot really mess with the markup that much. Yes. So we create sections of structured content. Just something that is, I think, important to remember, that the paragraph is not really reusable. You cannot, if you have created one paragraph, it's part of that node or that entity, and you cannot really rely on that paragraph being added to another node, for example. If you want to go that route, I think you should use the blocks. Yeah. So let's go into the next section. That's the cyclists. And I want to compare the display suite and the context modules. So when we look at the cyclist, we are looking at his profile, his or her profile. So we want to see a couple of stats. We also want to see the clubs that the cyclists belong to, and a bit of more information on the right side. So, and I'm going to show on the website how we did that with display suite and what we can do with context. So let me jump back into the website. So I'm opening up Inky, and we can see that there's a couple of basic fields output. They are in a layout, and as I haven't written any CSS, there must be some way to define that layout. We have the clubs below there. On the right side, we have a diary of other things. As we have implemented the cyclists as actual users and not content, I can see that that's an actual user that I'm editing. I've organized the information into different tabs with the field group module. And so I can insert my base information. I can also enter a bit of biography and account information. And when we look at the markup, we can see that, just to give a rough idea, we can see that there's a group left, a group right, and a group footer. So it's as we could do in a template, the fields have been restructured. And in order to do so, I installed the display suite module. And a very nice, or first gift that the display suite module gives you is that you can directly access the managed display for any entity that you're looking at. So rather than going into the backend saying, okay, give me structure, give me display suite, and here display suite shows me all the different displays that can be configured. So for each of the entity types, content, custom block, paragraphs, taxonomy term, all of those entity types, I could now jump in. And what we are talking about are the cyclists, so they are users. So when we go there, we can go to manage display. which is nice, so you can understand how Drupal works. But it's also like a lot of navigation clicks. So I think the developers from Display Suite and actually Sventel, and I've seen at least Sventel here, so they have done a very nice job at improving the user experience, the developer experience, so I can go to manage display. Yeah. Now, what's changing? First of all, in the lower section, you can choose from different layouts. So in this tab, we can see that there's a list of layouts that I can choose from. And let's just assume that those layouts are good, and I've chosen one. Then, what it does is allows me to put the fields into different sections based on the layout. So it's kind of the same system as I've described in the beginning. We have different regions, but the regions are not globally. But the regions that Display Suite provides are the regions for the content section itself. So we can further divide the content section into different regions. And in that case, we have a region left, a region right, and a region footer. And we can drag around the fields for them. I think that's already pretty awesome. So that allows us to kind of structure that. Doesn't mean that we have to rely on the CSS that's attached to the layout. That can still be overridden by the front-end developer. But if, as a site builder, we want to be able to structure the fields into those different regions, we can do that now with Display Suite. And each of those layouts can be defined in a YAML file. So we don't we can install Display Suite. It comes with its own regions, but we can also define our custom region, like our custom layouts with the YAML file, using something called the layout plugin. And that's what actually was supposed to go into Drupal 8 core. It was removed again, but now you can use the layout plugin as kind of a foundation to use with the Display Suite module or with panels, for example. And the goal is still to push it into core somehow. We'll see. We'll see how far that goes. Something also really nice with Display Suite, what I've been using here is to being able to put a view into the content area. So because usually views are exposed, for example, as blocks. And with the entity views attached in Drupal 7, with the EVA module, we were able to attach views to entities. And now we can do a different approach. So when I go to Display Suite, there is the displays section. I personally don't know much about the classes, but I know that for the fields, we can create fields based on blocks. I don't know, has anyone done that before? So a couple of you have been playing around with that, cool. So what I do here is I can basically attach any block of the system to any entity, and I can also limit it with some wildcards, and yeah, that's it. So based on that, now that's like a good alternative to not having to position the blocks globally, but being able to inject them directly into the entity. After I've done that, I have now the view with all the cyclist clubs that gets dynamically filtered by a contextual argument to only show the clubs that this person belongs to. I can show that now as part of the content region, whereas with the other approach, I would position it globally somewhere outside. So we've explained that with Display Suite, there is the possibility to put fields into different regions based on layouts via the layout plugin. And there's also the possibility to define fields based on blocks. To do the lower section. And for the right section, so who is a fan of the context module? Yes. So there was always like this battle between panels versus context in Drupal 6 and 7. And I think there's arguments for either. I personally believe that the context module will be dead for Drupal 8 and it's not gonna appear, but but it actually happened. And so we tried it out. And I cannot confirm if this is the same case as by now. But for this to work, what we had to do was to create like a global context that would have all the global blocks. And then we created another context for the user display. And what's nice is it allows you to do that encapsulated, show me additional blocks for this kind of section of the website. So basically the context reacts on some conditions, and when the context gets activated, what it will do is it will push additional blocks into a region. And from the experience from working on the recruiter distribution in Drupal 7, I can say that this is really nice, but you also have to do a lot of mathematics in your head when working with the weights, because you will, like by splitting up all the blocks into different sections, you get more lightweight block administration. But now, as you have all the blocks in different parts of the website, nobody tells you which one is higher or lower than the other. So you have to be really careful with how you define the weights. Like come up with your own scale. Like let's say you use tens always, and then +1, +2, +3, and so forth. Yeah. So that's what you can do with the context module. To recap, the display suite only enhances the entity display. I think that's important. Like it's a very powerful tool, but it only works with the entities. But entities are a lot of things, like users, blocks, content, and so forth. Also the paragraphs. So you could also now, what I've shown before, the sections of the paragraphs, they can also be put into having their own different layouts with multiple columns, for example, for each of the paragraph sections with Display Suite. It supports the layout plugin, and we can add block fields with Display Suite. For the context module, we can basically react on different sections of the website and perform actions. And one of those actions is to add additional blocks, which is kind of the use case that we're looking at from a content layout perspective. Yeah, and the context can also work together with the block visibility rules that we've mentioned in the beginning. All right, let's talk a bit more about overview pages. And quickly check the time. All right, so we have more sections, and don't worry, like I won't go much deeper. We're more than 50% already. So we have looked at the cyclists, at the routes. When we look at the bicycles, is that right? Yes. So when we look at the bicycles, again we have a header section and then a list of bicycles. So it's the same thing, but we've created it a bit differently. And the way we've created it was the following. So I've created a landing page called Bicycles with the page manager, and I've added the panels module to define what's going to happen there. And that's maybe a bit confusing, but from a system point of view, I think it's really nice that we finally have a tool that is about creating creating actually like routes in the system, with the tools that we have in Drupal core. What we can do is we can create pages that are based on content, and we can use, for example, views to create pages that are for overview. But we always, in order to have something like an overview page, we always have to create a view. Whereas if I want to create like really a landing page that is not content, we don't have any tools, and that's kind of the use case that Page Manager solves. So when we edit one of those pages, like the bicycles overview page, we can see all the power that panels gives us. And we obviously won't have time to go into detail, but it kind of highlights that there's a lot of more flexibility in that system that we don't have with the others. So there is something called Variance. So we can not only have one variation, but we can have multiple variation, and that can, for example, link to the use case that Michael described in the keynote today, where, for example, a user that has a certain criteria, like people under 20, they will get a different landing page, and people are over 20, they will get a landing page with, let's say, less content because they are lazy and don't want to read so much, or the other way around. So that's kind of interesting. Like, we can really create different variations of the landing pages based on selection criteria. And then again, we can see I'm able to choose from different layouts. And that list is basically the same list as Display Suite. And that's what's really nice in Drupal 8. A lot of things are more interchangeable and have been reused. So again, we can select from the layout plugins that are provided. They can also have settings. And then finally, what we do have is the page manager or the panels functionality, where we are able to place blocks that the system provides. And those blocks are usually like big blocks. But if you enable like a submodule called ctools blocks or something, I don't have it at the top of my head, you will also be able to position individual fields, for example. In that case, we didn't have to place individual fields, but we were just placing the global header and the view, but this time with the panels module. And then finally, something that I also found it, like, as site builders, we just like to add modules and add functionality, but often it's not really necessary to add a new module. Often Drupal core already provides functionality. So for the last section, what we did is we just used the views functionality. So in views, you can also add headers and footers. And that's, so for example, when we built the Drupal 8 site for Amazing Labs, there was no panel system or anything. And if you would check out the old, like how the Drupal 8 side of Amazing Labs was built, was actually like views with views with views. So a lot of inception, just like adding another view into the header, another view into the footer in order to create that kind of section after section after section, which is kind of a weird thing and bad to maintain, but less code required. So yeah. That's the way we can also leverage views to build content layouts if we don't want to add another module. So there was panels, that was views. Final module that I want to show is Panelizer. So let's go into one of those clubs. And when I've enabled Panelizer and the IPE, the in-place editing, we can see on the lower section that there's added functionality. So here we can change the layout. We can choose from different layouts. Then we can drag stuff around. So it's more like a, I don't know, Acquia wants to sell Drupal experience. We can save it here. And the interesting thing is we can save as custom, so we override this specific entity, or we save as a default, and that's like the global default. So that's what Panelizer is actually about. Like, I can panelize each of the nodes individually. There's a lot of power in that system. Yes. The other version would be to just write your own twig templates, and as we are site builders, we will just skip that. But I can show you how it looks like. So in Drupal 8, the templates look a lot nicer. So they have like curly brackets instead of the sharp brackets, the PHP stuff in there. So it's actually a pleasant experience. And I think if you are good at site building, you might also be able to build templates like this. And the way we usually do it, the site builder, when they create all the fields, they would also prepare the according template, and then the front-end person would be able to shuffle the fields around as they like it. The nice thing is that you can have specific templates, like as I mentioned in the beginning with the suggestions. Node -- article, for example, overrides the general node template with the article version. Yeah. We have two real-world examples, so you can go to localsearch.ch or fleetportal.ch, which are just two of the, like we have launched more than 10 sites already, and a lot of them use mostly paragraphs, where you can see the experience, how it can look like. Yeah, and that's basically all the tools that I wanted to show you today. Thanks for keeping awake, and I'm happy to take your questions. Yes, Mike? I don't know. Oh, fuck. Sorry. Aha, you can ask the questions over here. If you could come to the mic, then the question can be recorded. Thank you. But the mic doesn't work.
Okay, thanks. Do you hear me? Yeah. Okay, short question. You mentioned working with paragraphs in Drupal 8, but I also worked quite a lot with field collection module in Drupal 7, and I just saw it also available for Drupal 8. So can you just quickly compare it if you use it, and what could be use case for this module in Drupal 8? Thanks.
Yeah, okay. That's a good question. So they are basically the same, but with a bit more power. So field collection always requires you to have the same kind of paragraph after each other, whereas paragraphs allows you to have different variants of the paragraphs. So if you are sure that it will always be the same, so for example in the recruiter distribution we have a field called your experience, and then you can add sections with your work experience from 2000 to 2005, from 2005 to 2010. So it will be very structured, and that will also make sure that you can then later rely on the structured information be in that way. Whereas paragraphs to me is more like a structured blob of information, where you don't know which kind of sections the user will put in which order. So it gives a lot more flexibility. Apart from that, I think both modules are the same. I haven't played with field collection for Drupal 8. I would imagine that paragraphs has been developing faster. And ideally, we would be able to share code base, because paragraphs was kind of a fork of field collection. But I don't know if there's any efforts in that direction at the moment. Yeah, Fagur is shaking the head. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. It's a really good grab of all the different techniques that we have to create layouts from. But for me, we have two different ways of approaching this. One is who wants you to piece off, developers or users? Because in this case, we offer the two different experiences. One is for the user experience, and the other is for the developers. So in this case, I guess, for example, one of the clear cases is the editor when you leave on the user's hands to create their own layouts. For me, that's the most terrible thing for everyone. It's for users and for developers. So for me, that's not an option. But on the other way, I come into my question, is...
I understood you are commenting on your question. That's good.
There is another concern, that is there any performance issues in one of these options? Or if there is a better option performance-wise?
That I cannot clearly answer that, because there's a lot of caching layers involved, and really depends on what kind of considerations you would have. I'm quite sure that having a lot of paragraphs will make your entity loads heavy, because you have to load a lot of sub-entities just to, like, one big WYSIWYG will be more lightweight than 10 different paragraphs being loaded. At the same time, if that really impacts the site heavily, I've yet to come to people like show me the results. Like for the sites that we have been building, we haven't run into big problems with performance for the paragraphs. Even if we've now worked on big migration projects where from typo 3 we migrated a lot of code into paragraph items, and it worked out pretty well so far. So we haven't found the edge case yet where it doesn't scale anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yep, thank you.
Cool.
Great presentation. As a site builder that does a lot of work with these modules on layouts, I'd like to share a couple of my learnings. So with Display Suite, you can make custom fields as well. So it's really useful if you've got cases where you've got two fields that need to be next to each other or something, and you can just insert one field. But also when it comes to adding a block field in Display Suite, and you've got the actual view that you want to embed, I find it really useful to also limit it per content type, because when you have a big site, you end up with a really big list in your managed display. But one thing I had been waiting for in Drupal 8 was the context module. And I'm used to using that all the time in Drupal 7 for my block layout, in addition to Display Suite for everything else. But because it wasn't there and it was an alpha stage when I was working on sites, I just put it there and just did normal block layout, but knowing that one day I'd review it and put it into context. Mm-hmm. But when you mentioned the issue you had with block weighting, I've always been quite careful with that, but I'm sure on a larger site that would get really difficult, remembering all your numbers. Mm-hmm. Does block visibility groups allow you to avoid that problem by having everything kind of almost on one page?
I wouldn't say so, because you still, the block visibility group cannot help you with reducing the number of blocks. The number of blocks basically drives the complexity of the weights problem. Like if you have 100 blocks, you will still have to figure out a sorting for 100 blocks. Like if with the block visibility group you're able to group them, but still it's a problem.
Do you think it's useful just to have a spreadsheet with all your blocks and your numbers?
Yeah.
Or is there a better way? Does anyone have a better way?
That's good, yeah.
Just list it per the group, so you just overview of the group, so it's like 20 blocks, 20 blocks, 20 blocks, so it's a little bit more convenient.
But is that, you'd open them all in different tabs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have like all blocks, or just this group, this group, this group, and you choose.
So you say it does help you. Yeah.
I think it'd be amazing if there was a way of like merging all your context onto one page and almost like having that. So if someone can help to build that, I'd be really grateful. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
When working with clients, they usually want large, by large I mean like 20 paragraphs, pages. And by default, the paragraphs only say what type of paragraph it is. So it makes it really hard to find what paragraph to edit. Do you have a solution for this?
Yeah, so when we look at it, so we had this one.
Maybe.
So here we don't really see what's in there, right?
Exactly, yeah. So you have like 20 of those. And you know you want to edit one word in one of those. So, this is a big pain in the ass for us. Yeah. And if you leave them all open, if it's a really long page, because you're editing it, it's like 5 times longer.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm not mistaken, there's a setting to control that.
So you can have them all open.
You either can have them open, but you also can show them in a summary mode. And the summary mode only shows you like the rendered teaser version. Nice. And there's some work in the paragraphs queue to kind of consolidate the efforts in that direction. But to my understanding, there's already a possibility to do so. Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
You can add display suite on the edit page. Layout, and then modify the field in order to show it. Yeah, there was.
I lost you.
We had the same problem with the site that had a lot of paragraphs, and there's a patch in the paragraphs queue that changes that you can give it a title. And
Yeah, the admin title for the paragraph. I think what we should do is just write a blog post about some paragraphs, best practices. That would be awesome. Cool, thanks a lot.